Dubey sir, now you can unmute and introduce Michael Mendizza.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, friends. Good evening to Michael. Uh, I want to extend a very warm welcome to our speaker, Mr. Michael Mendizza, today. And I also want to thank him profusely for accepting our invitation and being with us for a talk before the Indore study circle. Uh, Michael is going to talk on a very simple sentence. It's so damn simple. And Michael will explain what it means. Uh, I think Michael needs no introduction in any case circle world over. But for those of us who are joining the Indore group now, I'll briefly introduce Mr. Michael Mendizza to all of you. Michael is an entrepreneur, author, educator, documentary filmmaker, and founder of Touch the Future, focusing on optimizing human potential, beginning with the parent-child relationship. Michael's close relationship with Krishnamurti began in the 1970s. He directed The Challenge of Change, the first feature documentary on the life of Krishnamurti, produced by Evelyn Blau, followed by a steady stream of projects recording the public talks in the Oak Grove, and a second film with a silent mind, Beyond Myth and Tradition, a collection of over 100 first generation interviews, the publication of the book Flowering, drawing on the first generation interviews, a new and educational series also titled Unconditionally Free is being produced. Michael is the author of Always Awakening, Buddha's Realization, Krishnamurti's Insight with Rinpoche Samdong, the first Prime Minister of Tibet in exile, Michael's close friendship and mentor relationship with Joseph Tilton Pierce began in the early 90s. He authored Magical Parent, Magical Child, The Art of Joyful Parenting within Joseph Chilton Pierce, with Joseph Chilton Pierce, and Astonishing Capacities and Self-Inflicted Limitations, a summary of anthology of Pierce collected insights. So we are very happy Michael is with us today, and I want to welcome him once again, and want to hand over the audience to Michael now. And Michael, you can unmute yourself and speak for maybe an hour or so, after which we'll have the question answer session. Mr. Michael Mendizza.
Well, I again thank you for the invitation to be with you. I say it's a lot of fun, serious fun if you want to call it that way. It's wonderful. Because this particular draft or paper or theme is so rich and so full. As you know, I sent a copy of it as well as a couple of other documents for you to read prior to our session. I hope some of you did because it will really help. What I'd like to do is skip over rather lightly, like a stone on a river or a pond, some of the main ideas that are in this paper. Because I can't possibly do the whole the whole thing verbatim, and I don't want to read it per se. I want to read some highlights of it, and maybe I'd like to expand the question and the conversation part of it, because I think that's where it might become most interesting to everyone, is to see what questions arose in each of you as you read, hopefully, what this paper was addressing. The title, It's So Damn Simple, actually came from a lunch that I had with Krishnamurti. I didn't have a strong personal relationship with Krishnamurti. I was around a lot, and he and I would bump shoulders, and we would sit at the table and have lunch. But there were many other people that he was engaged with, and I always thought of myself somewhat as a journalist, a voyeur. You know, I was kind of sitting on the side a little bit, documenting and observing and so on and so on and so forth. So we didn't have a lot of conversations, but this statement came from one. It was quite candid. I was working on the very first film, The Challenge of Change, and he sat at the table at Brockwood, and he leaned over and he said, "Sir, do you really think that this documentary is going to do any good?" And I that was a tough question. I said, "Well, I don't know, but I think we need to try." And he smiled and he understood, and he said, "Quite right, sir." And then he said, "You know, I've only said one thing my whole life, but I've said it 1,000 ways, and it's so damn simple." So that's where the title of this thing came from, was him suggesting that the all 250,000 pages of transcripts, which is his collected legacy, is actually so damn simple. So this particular paper tries to dig into that notion of what's so simple about it, and why is it that so many of us spend so many years digging at this thing, and it doesn't appear to be that simple. It seems to be complicated, or it seems to be difficult, or it seems to be confusing, or we keep going back to it. And as I think in a previous meeting I shared with you a clip from an interview with Doris Pratt, and Doris Pratt is my poster child for it not being so damn simple. Doris was the secretary of the Order of the Star of the East in 1929 when Krishnaji dissolved it. And the interview that we shot with her was done in 87, a year after Kay passed. And it was shortly before Doris passed. So she had been working with the foundations and with Kay and working at Brockwood, and I mean for 50 years. And she said, he said that if you live with this and you work at it and study it, that you'll be transformed. And she said, "I've done that. I've done it every day. I don't know anybody who's done it more than me, and I haven't changed." So there's this massive contradiction between Kay's perception that it's so damn simple, and many of us who are digging at this and working at it and studying it and reading it and pounding at it. So this paper was an attempt to reveal to us what this discrepancy is. Why does it remain complicated when he's saying quite clearly from his perspective that it's so damn simple? So this is a very important theme for me. I think it's digging into the essence of both the teachings and also our frustrations, not feeling like we get it, etc., etc., etc. And I'm a little mixed because I would like to be present with you, but I still need to refer to the document with some highlights. So I think I'll share my screen, which will bring up the document so that you can see the quotes, if that's okay with you, and I'll still be able to be present with you. So let's use this one. Share, right. So I hope you can see the screen now, my paper. This is the one that I sent to you. And I began this by giving credit to an inspiration, which was a colleague named Darsha Narvez, and she was awarded a number of prestige academic awards, being one of the top 300 scientists in the world. The Vatican gave her a big, huge thing on morality. So Darsha is one of the brightest and most holistic writers and academics looking at human development that is around today. And she often quotes many of the people that are on Touch the Future's website. She quotes Bohm. She quotes a lot of people that I have associated with. So she's a real gem. And she sent to me a paper about 2 years ago, a year ago maybe, and the title of it was The Missing Mind. And she was quite keen on the anthropological research looking at pre-civilized cultures. That would be the hunter-gatherers, the small villages, the kinds of things that a colleague named Jean Liedeloff wrote about in her book called The Continuum Concept. Jean went to the Amazon in the 70s and lived for 2 years with a prehistoric village of villagers that were what Darsha was writing about. And basically, the mind, how they saw the world and related to the world, is fundamentally different than our mind. Their intellect, their verbal data, knowledge, that whole thing that we identify with cognitive intellect, was not as screaming as it is for us. And there were certain attributes of this original mind that was quite well researched now, as best they can. And I have to tell you, as I read her paper, I said to myself, she's describing Krishnamurti. So there's a, and I've shared for a long time that there's a what I call a shift in the default state of human consciousness. We are brought up and are trained with language. That's what school's all about. We're told stories, we listen to stories. So our mind is deeply conditioned to, like a needle in a record groove, to stay in this linguistic, verbal knowledge state. That's where we're grounded. That is our default state. But before that became the norm, we were in a different state. It's before we learn language, for example, when we're a young baby and a new human, the first year, we're not verbal, we're not intellect, we're not dealing with the past and the future and projecting and all the things that we do in our default state. So we actually are brought in, we come into the world in with this original mind, which Darsha is calling the missing mind. And then with language and story and culture and our identity and being shamed and all those kinds of things that we are, we imprint a different state of mind, which is basically the intellect. And the intellect is really, when you look at it, a device that helps us predict and control what's coming. It names things. It says this. It names it, and we can predict what it is. So that's where worry comes in, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we have these two different minds, but we lose contact with our original mind when this other mind comes in and develops in early childhood with language and culture and our social identity, our ego develops, et cetera, et cetera. But there's another mind behind that. And when you look at Kay's history, at least from my standpoint, it's pretty simple. He because of his vacantness that he came in with some of the malaria that he dealt with, almost died as age 2. The quinine that he was given all the way daily. So his intellect didn't develop in the same way that ours did. And this was this vacantness that he talked about, and he said it protected him, and so on and so on. So Darsha's description of the missing mind seemed very similar to what I intuited from both my direct experience with Kay and all of his writings, especially the notebook where he's referencing this different state, what he called the other. So basically, many of the traditions that we have recognized this, and they've tried to articulate ways to pierce through our normal default intellectual state of mind and reconnect with this other mind, this natural state, this original mind, if we want to use that. Bohm used the word the natural order of the mind. So our goal here is, as I put on my paper, it's right here. He says the challenge is restoring the original and natural order of the mind in proper relationship and balance with our inflated intellect before our misuse of memory puts an end to us all. So this is the fundamental challenge. And when Kay talks about the limitations of thought, which he does forever, we're trapped in this intellectual state, and I have for years said that the key to understanding Krishnaji is not necessarily the words he used, but it's understanding the state of his mind, not the concepts or the words that he's in. So what he's really talking about are two different states of mind. What his normal default state is, or was, or is this original mind. And that original mind is not limited and constrained by all the conditioning of our intellectual mind. So how do you, and he said it quite clearly. So again, the real challenge is for us to is to bring our inner world, our life, our state of consciousness in balance by rediscovering and grounding, having the original mind be our default, and only then does the intellect take its proper place. Without the two, you only have the one, and that's the key to the whole show, as far as I'm concerned, is that we need to rediscover our original mind, which Kay calls silence, the Buddhists call it emptiness. It's empty and silent of what? It's empty and silent of this other state, which is our conditioned, our language, etc., etc. So in again referring back to my colleagues, Darsha and a Native American that she worked with suggested that the Aboriginal mind, the Native Americans, how they perceived the world and related to the world, would give us keys to understanding this original mind, because their traditions were embedded in natures, much like the prehistoric villages that Jean Liedloff traveled and lived with, and I somewhat challenged that, and I said, yes, these groups can give us hints. Yes, they have value. They give us hints, but because we have not been raised in nature as they have, we are going to listen and hear their precepts, their way of seeing, how they see and experience the world, but we're going to hear it with our intellectual conditioned mind, and we're only going to hear it intellectually. And I suggest that there's a parallel with Kay's teachings. This is the same thing that goes on with all of Kay's teachings. This was a big insight for me near the, working with his work for 50 years, 45 years. We all listen, and as we listen, the state of our mind stays the same. And he said, with complete attention, real attention, if you give real attention to what he's saying, what happens is the use of language or metaphors becomes a window. His metaphors become a window, and that great attention that he asked us to give becomes a window into our own nature, into ourself. And he said this 1,000 times. So the quality of attention of listening, our normal attention to listening is not it's not intense. It's not really it's not a high level of attention. We listen through our intellect, and that whole mindset is a relatively low level of attention. If we gave complete attention to the window, the word, we would actually see directly what the window was revealing in ourselves. There would be a direct perception of what the words are describing. We wouldn't be limited just to the description, and he talked about that at length. So basically, this quality of attention is the key to transforming his words into clear, direct perception as an experience of ourselves. And that's the missing link that I think most people have most of the time. Doris Pratt listened and studied and worked and did all of that, but she stayed in her little bubble, her intellectual bubble, and never saw as a direct experience or an insight what that window or metaphor was revealing. And I think that this is the key to the whole study of Kay, the whole listening to him. And I think I know that there's plenty of references that we can pull that will bring that about. So the key, what started this thing was this notion of hopelessness. We all look at the world today. He said it was a mess back when he was alive. It's certainly a mess today. And we've got our ecological challenges, we've got our economic ones, our political ones, biodiversity, et cetera, et cetera. So is there any hope? And one of the things I bring out in this paper is that the feeling of hopelessness is because we are trapped in our intellectual bubble and we don't have a direct connection to the original mind and what David Bohm called its infinite potential. So in the original mind, you have the infinite potential. In our default state, we have conditioned knowledge and confusion, etc., etc. Now again, I don't want to sound like Kay because I'm not trying to paraphrase Kay, but many of the observations I'm making are intimately woven with everything that he talked about. So again, the challenge is for us not to understand more content. The challenge is for us to actually change the state of our mind, not its content. And that is the key. It's state specific. So one of the key statements that Kay used, which he started the dialogues with Alan Anderson, he said it's the responsibility of each human being to bring about their own transformation, which is not dependent on knowledge or time. And then I put including technology, screens, thought, and imagination. So it is the responsibility of each human being to bring about their own transformation, which is not dependent on knowledge or time. This one sentence is the most distilled essence of Kay's whole story that you'll find. Now, what does it mean, not dependent on knowledge or time? What it means is not dependent on imagination, language, not dependent on the intellect, not dependent on the state of mind that is our habit, is our default. So the transformation is not dependent on that mind, which means we need to find another mind, basically. And that's the whole key to what he's talking about and what this explores. And then I carry on a little further by saying, going back to Darsha's work, we live for 99% of our biological existence in a sensory, emotional reality that mirrored our authentic nature, which is nature. So we lived in direct, our perception was not self-centered, intellectual, conceptual, imagined. It was direct perception of nature, which is actually who we are and what we are. And then 10,000 years ago, with the exponential growth of the capacity for abstraction in the neocortex, civilization came, culture came, and that exploded. That capacity to imagine exploded. And I use the little metaphor example. You know, imagine the iPhone. You're in the 1800s and you're used to a telegraph, and somebody gave you an iPhone, right? Now that's what the neocortex is to our primary sensory experience. That's how dramatic this explosion of the neocortex is, and how it changed forever what we call consciousness. So I make some observations about technology, because basically technology is an extension of your intellect. It's a machine intellect. It's a machine knowledge. It's dealing with knowledge. It's basically a machine. Kay and Bohm went into great depths with this. So what's happening is that the technocracy, which are the people who say, well, organic life is really not viable. What we need to do is migrate consciousness from a biological base to a silicon base. And that way we can just kind of, copy ourselves as a database into hardware, and we can just basically reincarnate ourselves as easily as we copy data to a hard drive, making nature irrelevant. And that's actually what many people believe, and that's where a lot of the technocracy is driving the bus. So then I quote David, and basically this is quoted from the papers that I included as your extras. David made this profound statement: "We are faced with a breakdown of general social order and human values that threatens stability throughout the world. Existing knowledge," and then in my parentheses, "including technology and artificial intelligence, cannot meet this challenge. Something much deeper is necessary, a completely new approach." Now, that's what this paper is about. That other approach is basically the same thing that Kay was saying up here. It's the responsibility of each human being to bring about their own transformation, which is not dependent on knowledge or time. This is the same thing that Bohm is saying. Something much deeper is needed, a completely different approach. They're saying the same thing. And then I back this up with a little thing about Star Wars and that George Lucas understood this in his Star Wars myth, and he said, machines are not influenced by the Force. Krishnaji and Bohm talked about this too, that what we're describing as insight, which is this direct link to infinite potential, is excluded by machines. Machines are excluded from insight. They don't have insight. They can just copy and they can just multiply faster than we can. But machines don't have the capacity for insight, and that's the big deal. And again, Jerry Mander, who wrote a number of books on media and so on, titled his second book, "In the Absence of the Sacred." That's what's missing, the sacred. Machines don't have the sacred in it. So I then go on to talk about epigenetics, and epigenetics is a relatively new field that is describing how the environment is the catalyst for genetic expression. So it's not that there's a mechanical blueprint in the genes that are replicating. The genes are sensitive to the environmental signals, and they adapt and mutate in relationship to the changing environment. This was something that I looked at with my colleagues 20 years ago, when you alter the environment, you alter the brain. And if you look at the Aboriginal life of how they were moving through the forest or through nature, and you look at our life, where we're sitting in our cars and looking at our phones and are plugged into earphones and completely cut off from nature, you can see that there's an epigenetic process going on here that's accelerating by excluding us from nature and pushing us into a machine, a more machine-like way of living. And then I use a nice metaphor here, and I say that the level of noise that the original mind was used to was similar to that which is in a forest, and it's about the same as a refrigerator, the little hum from the refrigerator motor. And then I say, but it's not the same that's not the same level of noise or stimulation that you have when you're walking the streets of Las Vegas, or if you're plugged into your iPhone and it's blinging and blazing and you're cut off and you have your headsets on. So in these virtual realities, which Las Vegas is a virtual reality and so is the phone, we don't notice the difference. We don't notice what we've lost. And this is what Darsha was talking about, the missing mind. So it's only when that noise stops do we appreciate the subtlety of silence. And that's a key deal. It's back to what Kay is calling silence. When all of that noise, which is our mechanical thought process going on, and I'm using the metaphor of the streets or lights of Las Vegas, that's our default state. But behind that is another state, which is this original mind. And I said, like a shiny new toy, our capacity to imagine dazzled us, enchanted us, overwhelmed our attention. And we were so captured by memory that we kept replaying it over and over and over again. So I used an interesting thing, and I'll skip forward a little bit, but it's kind of fun. It was a fun spot. There's something called metabolic flexibility, and it has to do with the way that the body processes and generates energy. And we basically have two sources of energy. We have sugar and fat. And fat is obviously the long term. Sugar is kind of for the sprinter. And so there's a simile or a relationship to the brain, to our mental state. And it's only when the tank is empty of sugar does the physical body shift its metabolism. You can think of it, we have two engines. We have a diesel engine, we have a gas engine. And it's only when the gas is empty do we shift over to diesel. And I'm using sugar as the example. So it's only when the sugar is gone, when we stop eating sugar, does the body shift into processing fat for energy. Now, I'm suggesting that that's a nice analogy for what's going on between these two brains. It's only when the noise of Vegas ends, and I used an example in the paper of the power grid going down in Vegas. So here you are in Vegas, blinging and blinging, and the lights are all over the place, and then all of a sudden the power grid goes down, the noise stops, and you walk outside, and instead of seeing the blinging lights and the cars going by, it's dark, and you look up and you see the Milky Way. Now, the only reason that you saw the Milky Way was because the lights of Vegas went out. And this is basically what Kay is talking about with the ending of thought, with the ending of that noise, with the ending of this habitual. It's a shift of state is the main point. The silent mind looks up and sees the Milky Way, and I'm using that as a metaphor for infinite potential. But when the lights are blinging, when the phone's ringing, when our attention is trapped in our habitual state, the Milky Way doesn't exist. We don't see it. I use a colorblind metaphor. We're colorblind. We don't, the Milky Way is there. Infinite potential is there, but we're colorblind to it, so we don't see it. It's only when the power grid goes down and the thought process ends does awareness and attention expand to include infinite potential. And these are, again, just another nice way of exploring what Kay is talking about. And this is where the power grid goes down. So then we talk about insight. Now, insight, as both all those other papers that we talked about, insight is a very specific phenomena. Joseph Chilton Pearce wrote his first book, and its title was Cracking the Cosmic Egg. And the cosmic egg is a Vedic image for what our self-worldview, our reality construct. Now, our reality construct is, for us, Las Vegas, right? That's who we are. We're living in this blingy, bluzzy thought thing. That's our reality construct. And we don't have any contact with the Milky Way. We don't even see it. But every once in a while, something happens, some phenomena happens that shouldn't happen in that reality. And in Joe's case, fire didn't burn him. He was smoking cigarettes in a bar with buddies in his mid-20s, and for some reason a buddy said, "Joe, your cigarette's burning down. You're going to burn yourself." And for some reason, unexplained, he said, "No, fire, it can't do that." And he puffed on the cigarette and he put the cigarette out on the palm of his hand, and there was no burn. And he, being a show-off, he puffed up a couple more cigarettes and put them out on his face, and so on and so forth. So because there was a shift in state that actually changed the laws of nature. And in that state, fire did not burn his skin. And the fire walking in Sri Lanka, that's been a tradition for centuries, he researched, and so on and so on and so forth. So our self-world view, our reality construct, is actually defines the laws of nature. But it's a relative construct. And in infinite potential, those laws can actually be shifted around. And we call those miracles, spontaneous healing. There's all kinds of things that are examples of what we can call a breaking through from infinite potential into our limited reality construct that changes what we call reality. And insight is that. And a classic example is Mozart, how his symphonies and his music came to him. They came to him spontaneously. He didn't work it out intellectually. The whole symphony, boom, bang, was there in an instant, the whole thing. And then he had to sit down and painstakingly decode that flash of insight into pen and ink and notes where the intellect could use it, and that symphony could then be shared and played with others. And Joe documents in the paper that I gave you other examples of scientific discoveries where that same phenomena of this direct flash occurring. Now, I'm suggesting that Krishnaji lived in a state that invited insight. That was his default state. He was not thinking. What we call thought was not operative. The power grid for Vegas in his mind went out, and that revealed the Milky Way, and he lived in the Milky Way, right? That was his reality. But then he could actually turn on the intellect. He could use concepts. He could use imagination to communicate, to navigate, to go through. But he used it as a tool. Intellect was a tool. It wasn't reality. It was a tool that's a tool that could be used guided by insight. And this insight is the natural order of the mind, and it is nature. This is what the Chinese called the way and Taoism, etc., etc. So now you're being led by your authentic nature, because you're not being led by intellect, you're being inspired and led by insight, and then you use intellect as a tool in the service of insight. So this doesn't happen unless the default state of your consciousness is in this is grounded in what Kay called otherness. And this shift from our default state is grounded in the intellect, in language, metaphor, image, concept. His was not. His was grounded in what he calls silence, or the absence of that. And then when needed, he would draw upon the tool called intellect, but then he would go back to silence. And implicit in this is both something called attunement and attention. And he was quite clear, most of us live most of our lives in this rather dull state. Our default state is dull because we're dreaming, we're daydreaming, we're talking to ourselves. We got this noise going on in our head, and we're talking to ourselves all the time, which is like the lights of Vegas, right? So the chatter in our mind is like the lights in Vegas, and it blinds us to the Milky Way. And it's only when those lights go out do we see the Milky Way. And this I liked. It was a fun metaphor to help explain what Kay is all about, and what prevents most of us from what he called living the teachings. I go on a little bit, and I talk again about machines and media, because media is thought. Media is thought, but now it's turned into graphic thought, but it's all thought. So this, as we're watching the phone, we're listening to the words, we're doing all this thing. So the technological revolution has added untold brightness to the lights of Vegas, right? So the lights of Vegas are being enhanced and added to, and now you go into the restaurant and you got TV screens all over the place. So what Kay calls the silent mind is the technology is the antithesis, because it's not only in the absence of the sacred. There's nothing sacred in all the noise that technology generates, but it actually prevents you from seeing your true nature, which is the Milky Way. So I'm very cautious about the role of technology in this regard. They're claiming it's the savior, where it's actually the poison that's going to take us out. This is a very interesting notion that David Bohm described in one of our interviews, and he was talking about the ego. And I said, why is it so hard for us to perceive the nature of the ego? And he said, well, basically the ego is an illusion, and in order for the illusion to have its enchanting power, we have to the illusion has to conceal that it's an illusion from awareness. So concealment is the way that is the primary defense for the ego to continue to dominate. And the same thing is true of our mental states. So we're trapped in this virtual reality game, which is now both our inner thought and technology, and the game prevents us from realizing that it's a game. We look at the screen and we reify it. We pretend that it's all real. So we continually confuse ourselves between the virtual reality and what is actual reality, and this just sustains the power, the enchantment of Maya, or that extended virtual reality. So the key to this is, we have to have an insight into the illusory image-making nature of our cognitive process. And again, Bohm, I'm stealing from David because he used the metaphor of a magician. He said, well, you're watching the magician cut the lady in half, and there you see it, there she is, she's cut in half. Oh my God, how did you do that? But if you actually know the trick, that he's using mirrors or there's some other illusion that's confusing you, then you actually see the trick. You don't see the illusion. And that is what we need to do in ourselves. And the only way we can do that is by discovering this other state, which is quiet, which is silence. And the key to doing that is attention. And he said it so clearly, and I'll conclude this little rant with the quote that I used for Kay. It's right here. This was, by the way, the first recording of Kay in the U.S., filming of Kay in the U.S. It was in 1966 on PBS. And he said, what we're trying in all of these discussions and talks here is to see if we cannot radically bring about a transformation of the mind. And again, I say that this transformation is the state of the mind, not its content. There's no way that content is going to get you out of the state of content. Content is just like a mouse on a wheel. So content is not going to get you anywhere. That's Doris Pratt. She got stuck in content, and never grasped the significance of the state. Now, I'll go on. Not accepting things as they are, to understand it, to go into it, to examine it, to give your heart and your mind with everything you have to find out a way of living differently. Because you're serious, because you're intent, then you are aware of the whole process of the observer. Now, the observer, I'm going to blow up a little bit, because the observer in this context is thought, is the state of the mind that generates content. That's the observer, which means that you're totally attentive, completely attentive. And in that attention, there's no border created by the center, which is the observer. When there's complete attention, there's no observer. No thought, no judgment, belief, opinion, conditioned imagination. The observer only comes into being when in that look there is inattention, which is distraction. So this is such a distilled essence of what his whole teachings are about. We've put away the observer, thought, as a state of mind. And therefore there is complete attention, which may last a second. That's good enough. Don't be greedy to have more. In that greed to have more, you've already created the center and you're caught. In that attention, there's no seeking at all. Now he's shifted. Now he's talking about what this other mind feels like. In that attention, there's no seeking at all, and therefore no effort. And the mind becomes extraordinarily alert, sensitive, active. Such a mind is the religious mind, and such a mind has an activity totally different, a different dimension that thought can never possibly reach. This is so damn simple. What he just said here is so damn simple if we understand that we're talking about these two states. Thought can never the limitations of conditioned thought can never embrace or hold the Milky Way or infinite potential. Alan Watts put it beautifully. He said, you can't catch the wind in a paper bag. And that's basically thought's the paper bag, infinite potential is the wind. The paper bag can never catch the wind. And now when you realize that that's a state, so what do you have to do? You basically I close this by using my sugar metaphor again. I say you simply stop eating sugar. You simply pay attention to what's right in front of you. And literally, that's like the lights of Vegas going out. Giving complete attention turns off the power grid to the noise of Las Vegas in our chattering mind. You're just watching, you're just observing. And in that, your state, your state of awareness literally, I'm saying literally, grows and grows and grows and grows and grows and expands infinitely. And that infinite potential then has the ability to express as insight, just like Mozart's symphonies. And that's living in this potential for insight. That's what this shift from content is. It's not that you stop using your mind or stop, reading or having an intellect, but you go back to silence and you use the intellect as a tool in the service of insight. But if you don't have that, all you have is the tool. And thought is driving the bus instead of your true nature, which is this infinite potential. So let's end it with that. And hopefully you have questions that you thought of your own as you read the paper, and we can have a conversation about your questions.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks a lot. You have put it beautifully using metaphors. It looks so simple that you can put the transmission lights off and see the Milky Way, but it's easier said than done. I think we have to. There are lots of preparation needed before we can reach that stage. Thanks a lot for explaining it so well. We have a number of hands raised, so I'll start with Mr. Harshad Parekh. Yes, Harshad, unmute yourself.
Yes. Are you able to hear?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Michael. When this universe came into existence, we don't know how it came, and the scientists talk about the Big Bang. But what was behind it, why it happened, we human beings did not create matter, we did not create life, we did not create mind, but all this probably some kind of purpose behind this kind of evolution, and we have come from instinct to intellect. But as you said, we are trapped into this intellect and have not been able to come out from intellect and come to a real intelligence which can see thinking and feeling very, very clearly. So that is our problem of humanity, that we are trapped into intellect. But I feel that in spite of going through language and concept and science, there is still possibility for human being to come out from the plane of thinking and feeling. Like I consider it as a two-dimensional plane, thinking and feeling, come out of it in the third dimension, which we can call awareness or intelligence, and look at very, very clearly how these thoughts are forming. And then there is no effort involved. Everything is seen exactly as they are. So that this is very, very rare. I feel that coming out from thinking and feeling, coming out into is what Krishnaji calls intelligence or choiceless awareness. And even when I read David Bohm and other people, I feel that they are still in the plane of intellect, and they are using lots of words and making very simple thing into more complicated concepts. But whereas what Krishnaji says is coming not from intellect. And so when I read Krishnamurti first time, and I begin to really see myself how these problems were arising. And so in spite of having studied engineering and I was doing PhD, it was possible for me to see exactly where these problems are coming, the beginning of a thought. And in that, the mind becomes very silent and it can see everything. So for some few people who are very, very curious to look at their own minds, and they have the energy and passion and curiosity, honesty, they can come to this coming out from the plane of thinking and feeling and look at thinking and feeling very, very clearly. And in that, there is no effort involved, and everything in life moves very smoothly. And this I am speaking from my own experience of more than 40 years. So, okay, I have finished. Thank you.
Thank you, Harshad bhai. Shankar, Mr.
Yeah,
Shankar.
good morning, Mr. Michael. It's nice to listen to you always. You said when the Las Vegas lights goes off, you'll see the Milky Way. I want to know, after seeing the Milky Way, can you see the Las Vegas also at the same time? Is my question clear, sir?
Sure.
Thank you. That's all.
Yeah. My friend Joe Pierce, in his essay on insight, and this book, Crack in the Cosmic Egg, he ended up writing 10 other books, but that was his first one. And he said basically that this crack in the cosmic egg, which is another metaphor for insight of another perception, another reality seizing the mind, and so on and so forth. He made the observation that crack seals over very quickly, almost, and he used the metaphor of a cut. You cut your skin, and the body, seals over it. And he said the scar tissue is tougher than it was, right? So the sealing over to conceal, to close up the insight, to close the capacity for insight. And this is basically the concealment phenomena that Bohm was talking about. Similar process going on. So I have to say that the fundamental insight is to experience directly the difference between a silent mind, truly silent, and what our normal state is, including will, including becoming, including trying to get better. This is why Kay would say conscious meditation is no meditation. Well, what does that mean? Well, to sit there and try to meditate is still is still the mouse on the wheel. It's still within the conceptual realm. It's still in that conceptual state. The true shift is not brought about by will. It's not brought about by effort. It basically, it ends spontaneously. The noise ends spontaneously. Kay would use the image of you're walking and you step out of the forest and there's this beautiful natural scene and it takes your breath away. So that is the natural spontaneous ending of thought. shifting from oh my gosh, how long is this going to last? You know, where's the drink of water? I need a cappuccino, right? So, you know, but then something happens and the power grid goes down. And that's why I like the Vegas metaphor. The power grid goes down. And in that instant, you see the Milky Way. But we keep eating sugar, or the power, you know, we flip the switch and the grid comes on, and we start talking to ourselves almost immediately after this insight, this invitation to insight happens. And that's the concealment, and that's the closing up of the crack in the cosmic egg, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So these are all metaphors that are related. So once you've seen the Milky Way, once you look up and are taken by the beauty and the wonder and the vastness and so on and so forth. Again, in Kay's own writings, he said, you know, this moment changes the contours of the mind, and nothing will ever be the same again. Now, this is Mozart's symphony. This is your own moment. This is their own thing and now you have a very concrete, visceral, embodied, visceral. I'm saying it's in you can feel the state of the mind being fundamentally different in silence, insight, and when that thought comes back in, you feel it. You feel the brain actually constrict like a muscle. You feel how the whole state of the brain shifts when the grid comes up again, when the electricity comes in and the lights come back on and thought continues. Oh my God, what was this? That was so beautiful. You start talking to yourself. There is a visceral experience, embodied visceral experience. And to me personally, that's the key. It's not a concept that is the key to this shift of state. The concept can never shift the state. But you stumble into it. It's again biblical, you know, the St. Paul falling off the donkey or whatever it is. There's these moments of insight that are truly transformational. But it's not concept. It's a direct embodied experience. So, and I felt it in my own brain. I mean, I felt the difference for the first time in my life when I was in this state, where this expansive state, and then I said, "Oh my God, what is that?" And I felt the word. I felt the word start, and I felt it collapse back in. And it was the visceral experience in the brain, in consciousness, in attention, that was the key to going back. Because I didn't go back to the idea, I went back to the feeling of emptiness. What did emptiness feel like? What did silence feel like in the brain and in the body? And it was completely different than what the body and brain feel like when the lights of Vegas are on. It was a visceral feeling. So the key in my experience was the feeling, embodied experience, not the concept. And that's what made the difference for me. And that's what I'm trying to share with this, you know, that you can't, the concept isn't, that's Doris Pratt. Doris Pratt's the concept. You're never going to change playing with the concepts.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. Dr. Gajanan Rao, would you like to say something, sir?
Sorry, I must apologize. I'm only very grateful to God that I could have darshan of Michael. I joined so late. I forgot to notice it is 10 o'clock. I noticed initially. Sir, I joined when you were about to finish. I missed a great opportunity. I'm sure you will come again and talk to us, or I will see it in the tape when they always publish it again. But I want to say, I'm so damn an idiot, is the phrase you use. I know, as Parekh mentioned, not that I want to particularly point at somebody, a lot of scientists join him in discussions. I've been a witness to this. It'd be a very long question, winding away to the extent you lost connection with how they began. So Krishnaji would stop them, or at the end of it, say, "Sir, be simple. Probably you mean this." And that will make the question so clear to us who are around. He had the capacity. And he rightly said, using those words, we cannot be simple. We are lost in complexity. And although we are just a particle of dust compared to the cosmos, we assume proportions, formidable proportions, to think we are so big. And whatever feeling that that kind of complexity shuts you from reality. And so glad you had some experience of the sort you narrated just now. So you're very fortunate you have been with him so long. And I love to see your films, your discussions, Mr. Michael. So I have nothing to say. I'm only apologize once again. But beautiful to look at your title, this piece, the subject of the thing. Yes, it may not be so damn simple. Our meditation starts with a lot of effort. Where there is effort, there is me. Where there is thought, there is me. So I think we have to understand that subtle thing, to shut ourselves, not with an effort. Can the light go off by itself? And another light comes. Thank you very much, Mr. Michael. I'm
Well,
so
it does.
glad
It does go off by itself. That's the point. That's why it's so damn simple, because it does go off by itself, without effort, etc., etc. So it's anyway. I like the title because of that, because it's once you get it, it's so damn simple. So
Thank you, Michael. Thank you.
sure.
We have Sanjeev raising his hand. Yes, Sanjeev, please go ahead.
This is Ravi. Please accept my
Can't hear you.
greeting. This
Can't
machine.
hear you. Something is wrong.
Sorry. Hello.
Yes.
Yes, go ahead.
Can't
Yeah.
hear. Is there something wrong?
Mic on. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. This is. Please accept my greeting. A machine called Ravi, which turned machine after 20 years of age. I had been a very good perception and insight till the age of 20, and I started accumulating knowledge in the form of self. And that knowledge destroyed me and the perception there inside. I do not have the insight and perception now. For last 1.5 years, I accumulated the K teachings knowledge. And after mother's death in August 27, I went into silence. And I experimented and tried very, very hard with effort to end the time, to end the self, to end the mind and thought, that all the recording images and experiences. But I couldn't succeed. I failed miserably. And I realized that I do not have the perception and insight. I do have the understanding, the whole understanding, intellectual and verbally understanding of the K teaching, that I have to end it. But the thought was so strong that they said to me adamantly that do whatever you want to do. We will not go. We will be here. We survived for long. We struggled for long to come here. And you are trying to eliminate us. I will not go. And that was a frustration day, and very, uh, very weird day for me, that I couldn't end myself. And then it come to me through the teachings itself, the books, commentaries on living and the world within, that the thought, the mind, the self itself is a net. The whole game of it, that it's the cobweb is pretending that it's a spider, but it's the spider is not the net itself is the cobweb. But the way you talked about the state of the mind, I was not aware about that. Can that be cultivated, the state of the mind? And in during this phase of emotion, because I lost my mother, so that thing brought some kind of attention and awareness with my emotion and thought. And gradually, that is, I'm having that thing, and I think that I will be able to understand it. I understood the whole game of seeking motive, thought, thinking, mind, but still I'm in the trap. So I think the technology destroyed me, the knowledge destroyed me, the perception got into some illusion, and I'm completely illusionized because of these things. So can that perception, that insight, that state of mind be cultivated? And I think the answer could be attention. But that attention could be cultivated, that awareness could be cultivated. Thank you.
I'm reminded of my privilege to spend quite a bit of time with Samdong Rinpoche, and we met on 3 or 4 major occasions. We interviewed for a total of 16 or 18 hours, which is extraordinary, over 5 years. And the Buddhist tradition understands what we're talking about. And the book that I authored with his insights, called Always Awakening, is a priceless exploration of the Buddhist view of these issues. And he explained quite briefly that there were several so-called practices. First of all, they only accept people who they deem have the capacity to understand themselves. And the tradition is that there are 3 different qualities of people. There are people that are completely dull. There are people who are less dull, have some lucid, clarity about them. And then there are people who are quite bright and have capacity. And they reserve their explanations of these kinds of challenges to the 3rd level, to the people that they feel have the capacity to grasp what's being pointed out to them. And I use my illustration of the metaphor of using most people, when they hear a metaphor, they only see the metaphor in their head, meaning they only look at the metaphor. They don't have the quality of attention or clarity to penetrate through the metaphor like a window and see the real thing in themselves. And this is a matter of attention. It's anyway. But it's a critical difference. Do you look at the window and read what may be on it, or do you look through the window and see what the window is revealing? Those are 2 completely different states. And that's the difference that I think makes the difference. So assuming that they have their practices to help people see in themselves what we're exploring, the first is the capacity to pay attention, or mindfulness. And throughout all of Kay's work, he keeps going and hammering at this. It's all about attention, gathering attention, to penetrate through the window to see what it's revealing, instead of just listening to the words. So first comes that quality of attention. You can't give attention and have the noise in your head be blabbing at the same time. So giving attention naturally, spontaneously, quiets the lights, shuts down the lights of Vegas, quiets the noise. You can't give attention in the way that we're talking about and sustain the monkey mind, as it's called. So naturally comes that attention. So you cultivate attention. You just go back and pay attention. I was dyslexic as a kid, which gave me a handicap with language. And I was quite humiliated to stand up in front of a group and have to read because I couldn't read very well, so I would stutter, and it was really quite painful. And in all of that, I discovered that the fear of humiliation was the ego, and the way to get rid of the ego was simply to pay attention to what you're doing and not giving attention to the ego reflex. So I learned very early, spontaneously, that attention was the best way to negate the ego or to negate thought. Just pay attention to what you're doing. If you're speaking in front of people, don't worry about what they think of you. Just focus on what you're talking about. And the same thing is true with athletics or any performance and so on. Athletes call it the zone. So being in the zone is giving complete attention, which is what the essence of what Kay's work was about. So with that in mind, so you cultivate this capacity to give complete attention, which naturally negates the noise. But then you have the history. You've got your conditioning. You've got all these images that you have about yourself, and you have all the images that you have about others. And do they accept you? And why are you humiliated? And did you fail the test? And blah blah blah, right? So then there is actually in the Buddhist tradition a practice of using that mindful attention and a form of dialogue with yourself to negate this virtual reality of your reified image of self and others, including the emotions that are attached to it. So there's a process of negating the hatred or the judgments or all the strong emotions that you have. And it's a practice, it's a discipline, but it needs mindfulness as the foundation. You can't go to level 2 without level 1. So first you need to practice, you need to cultivate this quality of attention, this mindfulness. Then you can go and spend however long it takes negating all of these reflexes that jump up automatically that have sustained the ego and culture for 10,000 years. And then finally, once you've negated the monkey mind and you've negated all these false images about yourself, you have this quality, this expansive quality of attention. And again, in their practice, this is when they move to Tantra, and they use insight with passion. They couple insight with passion, which actually brings them to the state that Joe Pierce was in when he realized that fire couldn't burn him. He spontaneously slipped into an altered state where fire didn't burn. And through the Tibetan practice of these are these high states that I believe Tantra is the proper word for. So there are practices that one can do, but they're staged and they need guidance and so on and so forth. But that's completely different than what Kay is talking about. Kay is simply saying, with complete attention, there's no observer. With complete attention, the lights of Vegas go out, and what you see is completely different, and that invites insight. And insight drives the bus instead of your conditioned reflexes. That's about as simple as I can make it.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks a lot. Harshad Bhai and then Dinesh Vaghmare. Yes, unmute yourself.
Okay, are you able to hear?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Michael mentioned the case of Mozart in music. Similarly, in mathematics, there is the case of Ramanujan, who used to get the final formula in a very mystical way. But in both these cases, Mozart and Ramanujan, there is a observer and the observed, they are separate, mathematics and music and the person. Whereas in this field, in what Krishnaji is talking about, in the psychological, spiritual field, there is no such observer and the observed. They are both one. And to realize that, uh, one has to realize it very quickly, because we cannot do anything. All we can do is to watch whatever is happening. And when I read Krishnamurti for the first time, I did not think about it. I did not gather the information, knowledge of what Krishnamurti was saying, but I was very curious to look at my own mind. And so I would read Krishnamurti for about 10 minutes and close the book, forget Krishnamurti, and look at how my mind was working. And when a person is able to do that, can look at one's own mind clearly, then there are many changes begin to happen in the body and in the brain. And that is why Krishnamurti talks about the energy which goes to the brain. And Krishnaji talks about the mutation of the brain cells. And also in Indian tradition, there is this energy which goes to the brain and transforms the brain. So this requires a real attention and not gathering knowledge and talking too much, asking too much. I never ask questions. Krishnamurti asks enough questions, but I wanted to look myself as I am. And in that, there is something new begins to happen. And then we begin to look at everything as if everything feels new. It's not through the knowledge that we look at the tree or the flower or the human being. And in that, there is a real relationship, there is a real love, beauty, all this exists. So this is, I am speaking from my own way of living for many, many years. Thank you.
Thank you, Harshad bhai. It's almost 11 p.m. in California, so we'll take the last question now. Prasad sir, please go ahead.
Sir, Mr. Michael is really blessed because he had such a close contact with K, and he helped him to record his documentaries and his films and all that. I personally think I entirely agree with the title of his talk. It is so damn simple. I have always felt that K is very simple because he is not demanding anything from you. It doesn't require any scholarship to appreciate K. I mean, he is only asking you to shed your scholarship, your ego, and things like that. I mean, shedding doesn't require any effort. To realize that you are a conditioned guy because of the various inputs you had since childhood. I mean, it doesn't require any particular genius to realize that you are conditioned. I am not saying it is easy to get into those higher spiritual states, if there are any. I mean, supposing you have to, it may not be easy to get such big experiences. But to realize that you are conditioned, that you are part of the humanity, your consciousness is part of the general consciousness of humanity, and things like that. What is so difficult about it, I don't understand. It is our scholarship, our anxiety to reach higher states, our comparison with other people. It is those things that make things complicated and make things look difficult. Firstly, for me, it is very easy to follow his public talks, but it is very difficult to follow his discussions with a scientist like Comm. Why is it like that? That is because in the public talk, he is free to say what he wants to say. Whereas in the discussions, either with the Buddhist scholars or with scientists, what is happening is he has to answer your query. And your queries are sometimes relevant, sometimes irrelevant. And he has to, adapt to the querist. That is making things difficult. So, sir, the basic tenets of Krishnaji are very, very simple. I don't require any baggage. What all he wants is to see your baggage. And I don't find anything difficult in that. So I entirely agree with the title of the talk, and that beyond myth and tradition, those 8 series, it is enough if I think Mr. Mendizza has heard those 8 series repeatedly. That is, I think, what I read somewhere, that he heard it repeatedly. I want to do the same thing. I heard them once, but every time it is new. Every time I come back to it, it is new. And I think that's a very simple thing. So, and it is, again, I entirely agree that K was saying the same thing in different continents. Maybe there is a little difference in the idioms. Maybe he coined certain words at different stages of his life. But otherwise, what all he is saying is see yourself. And the way he defined himself is something wonderful. If I am breaking a queue, I am being selfish. And I can give so many examples like that. And sometimes it can be very irritating because we are guilty of that. And I can give examples from our own conduct, the group's conduct here. I don't want to do that, but it is very simple. It doesn't require any Shankaracharya's scholarship. Thank you, sir.
Thank you all. Thank you all. I'd like to just close with an observation that was percolating as the last 2 questions or comments came up, and basically it goes back again to my time with Rinpoche. And in preparing for that, I read 7 or 8 books, and I knew a lot about K, but I didn't know a lot about Buddhism. So in order to have a conversation with a Buddhist scholar, as we did, I needed to brush up on the basics. So I spent a year preparing for the talks and times that we spent together, and I learned a lot. But one of the things was virtue. There was a treatise on virtue, and they had 2 columns. They had regular virtue, and then they had what they called golden virtue. And the difference between the 2 was with or without ego. So what I'd like to leave you with is to think about just simple the kindness, or think about empathy, or think about all of these core virtues. Empathy I'm going to leave you with because it's an easy one for me, but think about empathy. Now, frankly, when you look carefully at empathy, you realize that the whole structure and process that we call ego or intellect, just like in Star Wars, the Force didn't touch the machine or impact the machine, the ego doesn't embody empathy. The ego is a complete, or intellect ego is a completely, imagination also, is a completely different structure that may take advantage of empathy, but it doesn't embody empathy. The ego doesn't embody these deeper human qualities. So when the lights of the ego go out, then these natural primal qualities. And again, empathy for another person, love, obviously, compassion, and others, other virtues are there, regardless of whether the ego is active or not. And I think that this is I love it because it's a really clean way of distinguishing when that ego is. With empathy, you're not worried about how you're looking. You're not worried about how much money you're going to get, or whether you're going to get a parking ticket, or whether your wife is mad at you, right? You're not. None of those things are active because those have been suspended, and this feeling of empathy for the other is what is. So this gives another hint to this division between what I call this natural order of the mind, which embodies the empathy and these deeper things. All of the virtues that the native and Aboriginal cultures teach through their story and through their culture, those are there. Those qualities are implicit in this infinite potential of this natural order of the mind. Ego, intellect, imagination, worry, comparison, etc., that's an overlay. And the overlay may have to deal with the consequences of empathy, but it doesn't embody empathy. They're two separate things. And that really helped me to see clearly what is imagined, what is intellect, and what is authentic in terms of our true nature. So one of the things that I'm personally working on is I have an 8-year-old daughter. I've got 2 grown boys, but I happen to be fortunate and have an 8-year-old daughter. So my personal challenge is, how do I help her to see what I'm sharing with you tonight and all these words that I've written and so on? She's not interested in any of the stuff that we've talked about tonight. She's just could care less, and rightfully so. Someday her intellect will be there, but by that time I hope I'm able to embody in her this quality of attention and some of these little hints of what direct experience looks like as opposed to imagination and intellect. If we can get her to be grounded and see that difference, now she has a foundation to be able to grow into a different default. She can grow into defaulting with the natural order of the mind instead of the imagined order of the mind. And that would be a great gift. So that's what I'm personally working on.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks a lot. We have come to the close. I think Dr. Gajanan Rao wants to say something. Yes, sir. Unmute.
Just a word. I will take more, and a minute, even less. But it's very important. Connects to the simple that Mr. Michael Mendizza has been mentioned. One of the talks or question answer sessions, I was sitting there. Krishnamurti came to say this when somebody asked, "Sir, the teaching is rather complicated. We cannot understand the crux of it, the essence of it." He said and lowered his voice and said, "The deep feeling, sir, is so simple you miss it." Thank you.
Right.
Thank you, sir.
Paul.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thanks a lot, Michael, for being with us. We are indeed
My pleasure.
grateful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dubey sir.
Thank
And
you.
just I wanted to request Michael Mendizza to come again, as Gajanan sir has not listened him properly.
Oh, no.
He's a father-like figure for me. Just I'm come.
Grandfather.
Do you second it, sir? Gajanan sir, do you second it?
Okay.
Thank you. Sir, let us close it now.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Modak, please.